Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Money News. This is always class about all things involving money. Thank you for joining us this morning. As always, I want to express my appreciation to Jim and Ellie Monroe for serving as technical hosts for today's program. This is a class about the big money news storylines in 2021, plus some storylines that affect us quite personally. This class about all the things and services you buy or admire or sell or trade or use as an investment or an income source or store of value for a rainy day or opportunity. In today's class, we'll cover many topics, but we'll focus on three. After $4 trillion designated by Congress at the request of two different presidents over the past year to help the economy recover, where are we? And what are the consequences of this record high spending? Secondly, what has changed in the past 12 months while we've been in and continue to be in COVID restrictions? And how are these changes likely to continue in our lives, and which are not likely? And since this is tax time, we talk a little bit about preparing taxes and encourage you to talk about your experiences so far, what you've found different in this year's tax preparation, and share it, not as a source of professional advice to our fellow members, but as topics that you may want to share with your tax preparers, whether that be you, whether that be a software package or a website, or it would be a former a professional tax preparer. Time permitting, and I hope there is, we'll talk about what's the latest in California's response to the three housing crises we are facing. This month and next month are particularly important months in your local governments as they designate locations in town, or they start designating locations in town where high density housing may be built. It's a process that will continue through the fall, but some key preliminary designations are being made. So let's go into the presentation. Call up the slides here. So let's talk about some big stories. Of course, the biggest story at this point is the pandemic and the generally good news that we are receiving. Not all good news, and of course, any death, any infection, any hospitalization is tragic. But the trend lines are quite promising. This is from today, this morning, the New York Times, 14-day trend line, down 18% in cases, 32% in deaths, and 25% in hospitalizations. We know the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is being distributed and will increasingly be distributed in our communities, adding a third vaccine and the first one-shot vaccine available. We also know that Congress passed a massive COVID relief bill, $1.9 trillion in a year, a 12-month period in which we've become numb to spending. 1.9 trillion still seems like a big amount of money. If you compare it to the two other big measures in the past year, the one passed a year ago, the $1.7 trillion measure, or the one passed last December, the $915 billion measures. A lot of money is being pumped into the economy through the distribution programs designated in each of those packages, each somewhat different from one another. Matter of fact, this chart attempts to show how different and how similar aid to individuals in the current $1.9 trillion compares somewhat comparably to the two other aid packages that have been passed. But it's in the aid to businesses and the aid to local government, in which the current one stands out. A lot of detail that we'll talk about more in next week's presidency class, but it's how the breakdown of where the money is going by broad categories. 176 billion for education, including a significant portion, according to our friends on campus in the administration of this campus, saying that is money will come down to Cal State Fullerton and will be readily used to help get us back on campus in a safe way. Stimulus checks, of course, a big chunk of that some of that money is already out, and the ones that were done electronic transfers are significantly out. You might, if you're eligible, you might want to check your bank account to see if it's there yet. This is a breakdown. Extended unemployment programs, 246 billion. And probably the most significant new item is the child care, how the child care benefit it has been structured. And again, we'll talk about that more in our presidency class next week. But these are big money issues. Goldman Sachs, the big investment banking firm, projects now U.S. growth in this year will be upwards of 8%. Compare that to the growth that we've had in the last number of years, last decade of not much more than 2 to 3% growth in a year. 8% is a gigantic rebound. So, and there is some good news to report. We know that the Centers for Disease Control says we can take off our mask in small groups of other vaccinated individuals. And it's likely that CDC will have even more of a relaxation of their guidelines should the current trends continue. In Orange County and much of Southern California, San Bernardino County, Riverside County, Los Angeles County, that these counties have moved from the purple tier, that is the highest incidence of the virus, down to the red tier that allowed indoor dining and indoor uses of gymnasiums, and the potential for theaters to open in limited capacity, and for schools K-12 to open with the county health officer permission. We've seen these pictures in our local papers about Southern Californians coming back to places of commerce and places of amusement, such as at Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm, both of which are scheduling April openings. Air travel was reported today in the Wall Street Journal as rebounding as well. Look at the far left on the graph. You can see how far it still has to go, but certainly has climbed back, and now nearing 1.4 million screenings at the daily screenings at by the TSA checkpoints. There's been some successes accumulated in the past year. Broadband access to lower income persons and families have expanded across America with a significant federal and state investment, and telehealth has become part of the healthcare communications infrastructure that was there always, but now very, very high part. 46% of healthcare consumers have now had at least one telehealth visit in the past 12 months. We found out at the end of the first week in this month about the jobs number for last month, and job creation in February was a significant increase. Still, 9.5, at least 9.5 million Americans are unemployed who were employed back a year ago. So 9.5. That's in addition to those who were not employed at that time. Some some sectors have completely rebounded. Manufacturing, construction. What's been it's classified as driving and warehousing have been very strong for a significant since broke back to pre-pandemic levels in July and been going higher and higher since then. General merchandise stores such as Costco's, Walmart's, and Target's, again, their payrolls have significantly rebounded. Though that may be people working in the back of the store as opposed to the front of the store, there's good things there. Still, all retail, when you exclude, so when you include not only the big retailers, the big box retailers, but all retails is still below where it was in a year ago, last February. And health and personal care stores are still well below, let alone restaurants. The Economist magazine points out that consumers across the world, particularly in what we would call the industrialized world or the first world, are sitting on piles of money. Lots of excessive savings have been put on the sidelines as a reserve against bad times. That money has accumulated and that's ready to spend, in addition to the new stimulus money, such as in America, that is available. Matter of fact, so-called excess savings, that doesn't mean you have too much money. That just means compared to his historic levels and as a percentage of gross domestic products, so that we can compare apples and apples together. The US and Canada, and particularly families have money that they could use when there's opportunities and when they're optimistic to spend that. What we don't know is how quickly will people be coming back to the office? This is from the Microsoft website. See how it is. You got tables for people to sit at in an office conference room, and then you have virtual people there to have a discussion with. There seems to be almost universal consensus that working at home will become a significant portion of many workers' lives after the pandemic. If they've been working at home now, they may be working at home at least part of their work week. We'll see how that develops. And a UCLA economic forecast that a very respected forecast says, even though California has been hit harder than many states, California is well positioned to rebound. So all those things are good. So is there any bad news in the pandemic area affecting economic matters? Sure. Some restaurants have opened and found that their customers weren't coming back at anywhere near the numbers that they were prior to the pandemic. We'll see if that trend will continue. Even a 20% or 10 or 20% downturn in a customer base can make the difference between a business succeeding and failing. The Federal Reserve Chair continues to say that the economy needed a major stimulus because it was starting to deteriorate. And while California may be well poised for recovery, the jobs numbers over the holiday period and beyond in California have been very disappointing. And Americans, they may be sitting on excess earnings, but 4 out of 10 say they are feeling the financial losses from the pandemic. So there may be different people sitting on the money than saying that, or it may just be the perception of the world that they live in. Some economic consulting firms, such as the McKinsey & Company, a very well-respected one, believes that upwards of 4.3 million jobs in customer and food service industries will disappear in the next decade. That the pandemic accelerated trends that were already occurring in those industries. And the Peterson Institute, that is another economic think tank, points out that don't be too optimistic about where we are now. We are still at, well, the official unemployment rate may be 6%. A more realistic way of looking at the unemployment rate is more like an 8% unemployment when you consider people who have, because of personal situations, including family care situations, are no longer looking for employment. And this has been a tale of two cities, employment recovery. Those who make the most money have found their jobs coming back strong. Those who made the least amount of money are still disproportionately unemployed. And those who are unemployed, a very high percent, even higher than during the peak of the Great Recession, are now considered long-term unemployed. That is, they've been unemployed for greater than 6 months. 41.5% in the most recent February jobs report. So still considerable room to go. And what you may be hearing about, and we'll talk more about in the presidency class, is there a threat of inflation? Remember, inflation is one of the big enemies of retired folks or anyone on fixed income. Will inflation be sparked because of all the spending and all the money coming out of savings and a robust recovery? Will lots of money chase too few goods? We'll only have to wait and see on that. We know in certain areas like motor vehicles and motor vehicle parts, groceries, and furniture and appliances, there's been quite an upswing in inflation. And in services like healthcare and recreation and housing, and those restaurants that are open and those hotels that are open, and the financial service and insurance industries, upticks in the cost of living. And one of the areas that are particularly hard hit is used vehicles. Inflation very high. Wall Street Journal reported the other day that factories are struggling to meet demand, greater demand than their ability to attract parts for the manufacturing process. Wall Street Journal, in somewhat of a snarky editorial today, said now that the Federal Reserve Chair has so much encouraged Congress to pass another stimulus bill, Now he has to find where to get the money. He and his counterpart, Ms. Yellen, as the Treasury Secretary. And the Federal Reserve is meeting today and tomorrow on a regular scheduled meeting. The chair of the Federal Reserve, Mr. Powell, does say, expect some temporary inflation. He's not worried about it at this point. Treasury Secretary said, there may be inflation that are short term, but should not be not a problem that can't be managed with the tools in existence. This is how the government bonds stack up, because you not only print money, you borrow money, and that shows you how Americans, the U.S. government borrows money. You see in their 3-year notes, not 5 years, those 7 years, those 10 years, 30 years that are looking at a 50-year note. The previous administration was even looking at a 100-year bond. The most recent consumer report on inflation showed actually very little inflation outside of gasoline and food. And there is the fact that there are greater demand for products and services that will be stimulated through savings and through the new governmental programs and the continuation of the existing governmental programs. It may actually lead to less inflation by getting people back to work. So we'll see how that works out. And finally, we have the issue of, well, are we really out of the woods yet? Aren't there variants of the COVID virus? And yes, there are. There are many of them, including a California variant, a New York variant. The more the virus is in human beings, and the more the ability for mutations from within the human being and among human beings. Both the UK variant, which may become the dominant variant in America fairly quickly, maybe within the next couple of months, couple of weeks, is showing up in a number of places in America. South African variant and the Brazilian variant from the Amazon area. Yet some of the so far some of the vaccines already on the market appear to show some efficiency against these variants. The Pfizer one having the same efficacy against the Brazilian one, and even reduced antibody levels may not make the virus less effective because of how the vaccine is effective, because the vaccines respond both with antibodies and with T cells as part of the process of fighting diseases. The broad scope problem, of course, is America and Israel and the Western world can become vaccinated, but as long as we're plugged into the rest of the world, until the rest of the world is significantly vaccinated, there is no perfect safety. So let's discuss this. There's a lot of stuff. Let's get into some of this. Do you think we're at a tipping point on pandemic news? You can hope there is. Is in your view, is good news starting to eclipse the bad? And how concerned are you about inflation reducing your purchasing power, or any other topic I've presented so far? Anyone want to raise their hands?
You showed one side of the bond. In other words, the number of 10, 20, 30-year bonds that are being sold. But isn't it true that one of the biggest purchasers of those bonds is China? And on a geopolitical basis, does that pose a threat to the United States on a longer-term basis?
Well, that's a good question. Some say it's just the opposite, that it gives us leverage with with the Chinese. I mean, we should talk about that probably in the presidency class, but
Okay.
and we'll talk about who owns the debt. We'll have a presentation on who owns the debt. I can promise you in the class next week. And there's
Okay,
pros
thank
and
you.
cons. But the fact that they're betting on us. The problem is when any foreign national own American companies, they have access to technologies, and some of those technologies are very valuable technologies, and of course China has a reputation, not the only country, but maybe the leading country in stealing those technologies without proper compensation to the individuals or authorization.
Mhm.
A good point, very good point.
Thank you.
Pizza Poodle?
Pete,
Yeah, hi. How's everybody today? Happy
how's your excess earnings these days, or excess?
excess earnings. There are none. There are no excess earnings in this house. Although I do have a potential job back with the Census Bureau. One of the things about inflation is that we do need a certain amount of inflation, a very low inflation rate, like what it's at now. But to have no inflation is going backwards.
That's true.
And that's not a good thing. So I don't think that inflation is going to be a big problem for us, I believe. Other items that have come up, there's a lot of money waiting to be spent out there because people haven't been able to go anywhere to do anything, and there's a lot of industries that are hurting. And what we see at the top line when people are employed, you can ride by these little shopping centers, the little shopettes, if you will, where there's 10 businesses that used to be there are no longer there.
Yes.
So those businesses used to provide for income for those families and also provide for the economy, just the general economy. Those are no longer there. We aren't counting them because they were solely owned businesses. Well, a lot of them you can't apply for unemployment insurance because there is no unemployment insurance for self-employed, that type of thing.
It was just recently that it was made available to some of the business loans and grants were made available to single proprietorships. You're right on target on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're looking at small businesses, and those people are what, 250, 300 employees or less that are considered small business. I'm talking about the mom and pop.
Yeah, that's right.
The single family business that has maybe 10 people working there. They're not counted at all. And that's a shame.
Thank you very much. Good points.
Mike, I have two hands left. Noreen?
Okay, let's do both.
Okay,
Hi,
thank you. Noreen?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Question, I understand the 1.9 trillion, all the parts of it, except the child tax credit. It seems to me like in the past, when you got a credit, you just didn't pay it on your taxes. But like they're gonna send them money now. I don't understand that.
It's going to be paid in effect in advance, in installments, paid in advance in installment, and it's what's considered refundable. So even if you don't, so it is a different structured. Some say some who are not who don't like it say it's a return to the old style welfare. Others say no, it's more like a guaranteed minimum income in which you're placing a lot of value on creating more Americans for our labor force at a time of declining population or a time of declining population increase.
Yeah, a lot of the newscasters also talk about it like it might become permanent.
That's right. It's aimed for Stephen Ratner, I think, made a presentation today on one of the news channels. I saw his slides. I didn't know where it came from. showed that it's starting to assume that it would be around in a year, that it's going to be very hard for members of Congress to vote against extending it in an election year. So we'll see what happens. Could become a permanent feature.
Thank you.
Barbara Talento.
Barbara.
Sorry you can't see me. They took my picture away. Anyway, what I'm concerned about is inflation, because if anybody's been to a grocery store lately, you've noticed that all of the prices have gone up in almost every one of the in any of the markets, and they've not gone up a penny or two. It's nickels and dimes. So I really am worried about that if it gets any worse.
Inflation is the one. I can't underscore how important it is to us seniors and others on fixed income. Inflation is the worst economy tax of all, because it's insidious and it affects people who, particularly when it's in areas such as food, it's as one time when I was doing some employee negotiations, one of the union reps said, we all have the same size stomach. And I have a little bigger stomach at that time. So he looked at me and said, well, except you. But we all have to eat. So it's a very good point. Let's move on. Thank you very much for all those good points, everyone. Well, let's talk a moment about the China channel. I'm going to, well, I had a discussion item on this plan. I'm going to pass through that, but I want to cover the China. China still remains a big news, even though we tend to be internally focused, and properly so during the pandemic. The China challenge continues, and most dramatically, last week, the China legislature, the People's Congress, passed a new 5-year plan designed for self-sufficiency. In other words, not only do they want to be exporters, they don't want to be importers on critical items. Very ambitious policy to be less dependent upon supply chains that they don't control. And so we need to keep an eye on what's happening in China. We need to compete with China in other countries, both to keep our people employed and for national security purposes. The China statistics in the past year have been very encouraging, including some released today about retail sales in China, are all showing a strong, though not bulletproof, economy in China. Whether you look at China's growth in global GDP, consumer spending in China, and that's even greater if you use to purchase power parity, and that is what it costs you to buy the same item in 2 different countries. But this is on the more traditional measure of consumer spending, and China's percentage of global exports. And China still remains a very big market to our farming community in America. Remember, the last year, American farmers, to a large degree, went on the dole, became significantly supported through federal funding because of purchasing drop downs by the Chinese. China is back buying again, buying a lot of soybeans, a lot of corn, a lot of hogs, a lot of chickens. And the American farmers are starting to rebound thanks to China. Though China is not bulletproof, as I said at the beginning, there are structural problems they have in their economy that could provide them problems in the future. Yet the story is overall a very positive one. Let's move on to the next topic. Let's talk about oil. Has anyone noticed the gasoline prices are up? If you haven't, I would posit that you haven't been out driving around buying gasoline, because gas prices are really up. This chart that ran in one of the local papers last week, it's been superseded by even higher prices. And of course, California, because of a number of reasons, leads the nation, at least the 48 states, in the cost of gasoline. Probably the 49 states. I think only in Hawaii, gasoline may be more pricey than here in California. And that's because Saudi Arabia is playing the oil market pretty good, and at this point, restricting supplies, both in their efforts in OPEC and with Russia and non-OPEC members, keeping supplies limited. And American producers were hard hit in the last year by falling prices, but many of the fracking operations needed oil prices higher than $25, $30, $40 a barrel in order to make positive cash flow. So Saudis are playing it very, very well. Look at how in Orange County, California, which is the, I guess is the orange line on that chart, how prices have gone up. And of course, they followed the California prices up, but in any case, that we were a year ago at $3.48 a gallon. We're now north of $3.80 a gallon, and we were as down low as $2.60, $2.69 a gallon last April. This is done from Gas Buddy. I did it yesterday, and it shows regular gas prices in the Orange County area at a representative grouping of gas stations. The forecast through the AAA and other forecasting organizations expect gasoline prices to continue to rise as more motorists get on the road and drive further distances during the summer period of time. The business columnist for the Orange County Register and other Southern California newspapers noted in a recent column, yeah, gas prices are bad for consumers, but it's a good indication that the economy is starting to grow again. He sees it as directly correlated. Here's some, I think, fairly good news. If you know a teacher, or if you are a teacher, and you're part of the or if you're or a taxpayer, the California Teachers Retirement System is in much better shape than it has been in a long time. The Legislative Analyst's Office, a body of the California legislature, a nonpartisan fiscal body of the California legislature, did a study last week. They released last week, it's in our class notes, on the CalSTRS system. And it says that significant progress has been made since the legislature changed how the CalSTRS pensions are funded. And they see that some relatively modest efforts could provide further strengthening of CalSTRS. It's not so much in a crisis situation as in past years. Now it's in an opportunity situation. CalSTRS is the nation's second largest pension system and the largest educator-owned pension system in the United States. Pension systems are evaluated on a number of metrics, but one key one is called unfunded actuarial obligations. And that is, if everyone retired today, do you have enough money to pay them? Of course, they don't retire today. If you do, you're 100% funded. If you don't, you're short, and you need to either increase your investment earnings or increase the amount of money you pay into the system, either now or prepay into the system. CalSTRS was trending downward until recently. That dotted line is the projected line in the last few years, according to the Legislative Analyst's Office. The current unfunded pension obligation at CalSTRS is $105.7 billion. And none of that is allocated to teachers, either to the state share or to the local schools districts share. And that means that should funding becomes a problem, the state would pick up a share of it, and employers would pick up. This is the big funding effort that was made in 2016 that brought the CalSTRS system into the favorable situation it's now in. State kicked in more money, school districts kicked in more money, employees kicked in more money, and it's had a good impact. The legislature the legislative analyst calls a few additional measures, and they think the system will be in the best shape in years. So an upbeat for those of you who are teachers to know more. You need to drill down and read the report, but it's a very positive one. Let's move on. There's some other money news that we'll discuss fairly shortly. First of all is consumer personal technology entertainment news. It's hard to find furniture these days, or at least that's this report in recently in one of the major publications. In fact, some retailers like Lazy Boy are finding delays of being able to get items delivered up to 5 to 9 months after they're ordered because of supply chain issues, manufacturing issues. The California State Insurance Commissioner said that the auto insurance companies in California generally overcharged its premium holders and ordered them to pay back billions of dollars in the coming months. So you should be, many of you will be getting a refund checks or credits from your insurance company. David Lazarus from the LA Times talked about how some retailers are thinking about going paperless, but they're afraid that some consumer groups are afraid that people will not be as attentive to the itemization and might companies might intentionally or unintentionally defraud them. So be careful when you start seeing companies wanting to go paperless. In California, law currently requires them to provide you with paper copy that you can refuse, but they have to require you. Here's something: if any of you shares your Netflix password with a friend or family members, Netflix is testing a way to clamp down on password sharing. So be wary of that. And let's talk about one more thing and then go to discussion. How many of you are bewildered by the great number of entertainment offerings available to you through streaming media? That is media media that you get off of a computer or a smart TV or even a smart sound bar these days, in which you get a variety of channels. Most you have to pay for, some you don't have to pay for. You use the streaming technologies either built into the TV or your device, or you can add it fairly inexpensively to your viewing platform. And this is a period in which there are so many streaming services, it's hard for consumers to make a decision. You got Netflix, you got Mumbie, you got Peacock, you got Showtime, you got Apple TV, you got Crunchyroll. I'm not familiar with Crunchyroll. It sounds like something I would eat. HBO Max, Epic Now, Shudder, which is a scary movie service, Amazon Prime Video, BritBox, as you can imagine from Britain, British TV, Hulu, Stars, Paramount Plus, formerly called CBS All Access, and the Criterion Channel, I'm not familiar with, and Disney Plus. The big boys are Netflix, Prime, Hulu, Disney, HBO, Apple, and CBS, now called Paramount, and the NBC-owned Peacock networks. If you look at the amount of downloading, you can see the market shares that way and the amount downloaded. And you can see how this is almost a 45-degree or 90-degree line during the pandemic of increases in viewing. Disney is the one that is coming on very strong. But you have to pay for it, and there's a number of different deals you get, and how many accounts you would have, and how many profiles that is. You know, individuals in your household who may want to have a different login than you do, or different profile of programs to keep for later viewing. And there's a number of free streaming video services: Crackle, Canopy, Peacock, Pluto TV, Roku Channel, Tubi TV, Vudu, and Xmo or Umo. Streaming has completely, and this pandemic has expedited it, has completely changed how Hollywood's looking at how they release movies. While many still prefer, and most still prefer, the theatrical release, many now see the value of putting the movies to home, even when movie theaters are open. The new head of Disney Corporation said the movie going has probably changed forever. It was at an inflection point, and now it's past that point. Big companies like Disney and Warner are making big bets on how that we will continue to stream video at home even when theaters reopen. Look at the difference between the global video streaming market and the American domestic box office. They're hardly ever over $10 billion, while the worldwide market in streaming is already $50 billion. Primetime TV has eroded. Broadcast TV has eroded in the number of viewers. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about how streaming has changed how you view TV in the last year. How you feel about that? How many streaming channels do you use? Are you getting what you think are good value? Is it a good thing for consumers? And how do you keep track of all these video channels and programs, or anything else you want to talk about in the items we've been just presented? So let me come back to Ellie. Anyone want to talk?
Patricia Dufay?
I'm thinking that free television is gone. There's a new series that just opened up. I think it's called Discovery Plus. And they're showing things that used to be on Food Network for free. NBC, that was at one time free. This is a trend I think is not going away. And that kind of bothers me. I subscribe to 3 channels now, and that would be another one. And you put them all together and you've got a pricey free television.
You may also have an overhang too, that you're still paying for your cable satellite TV. And then you look at your budget, you look at your monthly bill and say, oh my gosh. And you may have them on different credit cards, so it doesn't come in one bill. It's a dozen little bites by different people. Some you can bite per year. I mean, we took CBS All Access to get the Star Trek series, and we bought it early on without commercials, which is really fun to have, and for like $50 or so, and so that was a one-time annual bite, but it comes back the next year, and now they, where did that come from? Another charge. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have 2 hands up.
Okay.
Jim R. Monroe.
JR.
Hey, I guess I can't start my video. I guess.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But you can talk.
Okay,
Go
yes,
ahead.
I
There
can.
you go. We see you.
Mike, you really covered a lot of topics. I mean, if I could, I'd like to go back to just one.
Go ahead.
And it had to do with, you started infrastructure. And one of the things that I saw last week was this commission report chaired by Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google. And it was pretty striking. What it's pointing out is China is an artificial intelligence will probably in the next few years will exceed our capability where we're at. And in a number of areas, a very complex subject. There's semiconductors, there's other things. And the point is, we don't have a national plan. We've stopped investing in research and development, or we've cut it back significantly. And we've got to decide whether we want to be in the lead in the 21st century or not, because you can't depend on corporations to think long term. And so it sounds like it's a significant, I think it's a significant issue.
I think, yeah, and we should talk about that. And it's obviously an economic issue, but it's also a geopolitical issue.
Oh yeah, it's the
we'll
infrastructure.
spend some time of that in the presidency class next week, because that is an important subject, infrastructure.
Yeah, that report was really striking. I had no idea, what position we were in, but it really got your attention.
Thank you. Hi, Marilyn Wasserman is the last hand up.
Okay, Marilyn.
Yeah, this is just a quick question. It's about CalSTRS, to which my daughter belongs. I
Yes.
know they have to fund those pensions by a return on investment. So
Mhm.
I'm concerned about what percentage of their investment is in the stock market, since the stock market is at an all-time incredible high, and we've had a steady increase in the stock market over a period of time that's astonishing by historical standards. Can you address that, Mike?
Yes, most both the PERS system for state and local government employees and the CalSTRS system, which is a different system, but it's also
Yes.
also a state system, are significantly in the stock market, in stocks, in bonds, in what they call alternative investments. Used to be, 50 years ago, 40 or 50 years ago, pension systems were very conservatively managed, that they tended to be just in government bonds, such as Social Securities and U.S. government bonds.
Yes, T-bills, T-bonds.
But the rate of return was so low that they started to get permission from their state legislatures to, or directly from the people through ballot measures to be able to invest in the stock market. And of course, stock market goes up, stock market goes down. But in most pension systems that are invested in the stock market, most of the pension that someone receives at the, if you totaled up how much pension that person received during their life, once they retired, upwards of 70% came from investment growth. And a much smaller percentage came from the employee contribution and the employer contribution. So yes, when the stock market goes up, that's very good news for public and private pension system if their investment managers made good investment calls.
So their forecasts for the increasing funding of the pension plan, in essence, are based on, or are based on, in part, the continued expansion of the stock market. Then the stock market takes one of its deep dives, that vanishes.
Well, it's a compounded rate, and they assume there'll be up years and down years, so that as long as the trend line, the multi-year trend line, is meeting the objective of the fund, whether that objective be 7% or 6% or 6.5%. There's various formulas used by pension systems. They don't need to add any supplemental funding into the system. And when you have a good year as a public employer, and if you have some surplus cash, one of the areas you should think about is prepaying some of the pension obligations, take them off the books, because you can get significantly compounded savings if you do that.
Yes,
you can pretty much project what your pension obligations will be. Those are pretty fixed, death rates, historical patterns and all that, so that you can get a 6 or 7% return by just prepaying your pensions, by paying yourself, basically. Or the state paying themselves against future obligations.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anyone? No. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about retailers. There was a story, again, this one from the Wall Street Journal, about how the pandemic has boosted drive-through food establishments. Matter of fact, some food establishments are now going to 3 lanes in some of their prototypes that they're putting in some of the newer shopping centers. Many of you recognize how McDonald's has done lane splitting, doing 2 lanes, and Chick-fil-A, I think, has experimented with that, and others have experimented to get throughput out. E-commerce, of course, is a big story in the last decade, but particularly a big story in this pandemic year. Not surprisingly, this has been a year in which online shopping has accelerated, continues to accelerate, and continues to get a bigger and bigger share of all retail sales. It used to be that you go to, as I used to when I was employed, I would go to national conferences of the International Shopping Center Association, and they would have speaker after speaker talk about how the online threat is overstated, that it's never going to be much more than 10%. And for many years, they were right. But now look at it, at 21%. And I think you can make a pretty good bet that it's not going to fall from that level, or at least not fall significantly from that level. That doesn't mean that brick and mortar stores, physical stores that are in shopping centers will not do well once people get back shopping. Sporting and leisure where in particular it should have big spurts in-person sales, also furniture stores and continued big box stores like Walmart and Costco. The stores that have been hurt during the pandemic have been apparel stores, and increasingly people are starting to buy at least a share of their apparel online. I got to admit, I've been buying socks online for a while. And if you look at the estimated e-commerce as a share of total retail revenue by category, pre-COVID and expected post-COVID, that you see that apparel, sporting goods, general merchandise, and even home improvement and do-it-yourself will have some more spurt post-COVID as well, according to the analysts. Now, few countries do online grocery sales as much as China. Look at China's growth in online grocery sales. I gotta admit, later on today, I'm gonna go by Walmart and pick up, I think it was 17 items for $65 at 4 p.m. But in America, online grocery sales are still relatively small, but growing, about 6 or 7% now. But you can see if China is in the vanguard, or Britain is in the vanguard of English-speaking people, there's still considerable room to grow on online grocery sales. How many of you, and I assume it's open, I haven't been to the Amazon Fresh store in Fullerton. If not, during our discussion portion, I'd be very interested in people talking about that experience. In the Wall Street Journal over the weekend, there was a story on shopping will never be the same. That shopping will increasingly be affected by online sales and people's experiences in the past year during the shutdown. So they had 5 post-pandemic shopping trends. Let's see if you agree. That holiday shopping will continue to start earlier, and it will start not only in the physical stores earlier, but in the online stores. People don't want to, people will start early in order to make sure they get the items that they are seeking. 2, malls that survive, and many malls won't survive, but malls that survive will have a new look. And that look will be more what is called experiential. That is things to do when you're at the mall. 3, discounts may decrease and may be more targeted. The more you do online sales, the more we do online sales, the more the retailers know about us and can send out especially focused discounts. 4, some stores, Best Buy has is a leader in this, has also become, and Target become fulfillment centers. That is mini warehouses that they find it's cheaper to ship or have customers pick up at their stores, either ship from or pick up at their stores and even at their warehouses. So a portion of existing stores may become fulfillment centers or mini warehouses, let alone locations where you can do quick curbside and in-store pickup. The cost of having someone come to the store to pick up saves the retailer the money of shipping. Of those 5 trends, retail analysts said the one that is most likely not to occur or less likely to occur is discounts may continue to be targeted. They just don't think the retailers have that much discipline, that sooner or later they'll start doing 20% off sales, 10% off sales as in the past. We'll see. If any measure is a good measure of how things are changing, look at employment in retail versus employment in transportation and warehousing. How much they have gone. This is employment with 100. It's not the number of jobs. It's the index for it. But you can see how the number of jobs in transportation and warehousing, particularly in storage of products, have gone significantly up in recent years. People who work in retail now may be working behind the scenes in the warehouse, and may be paid several dollars an hour more by doing that. The big boy still in American online retailing is Amazon, though they are heavily competed against by Shopify. I have to admit, I've never used Walmart, eBay, and then all the others. Probably one of the biggest trends in American commerce is the growth of the massive warehouses like Costco and like Amazon. The employment centers, these massive employment centers, are now targets of unionization. These employers pay $15, in some cases more than $15 an hour, trying to resist unionization. But a big unionization election is underway now at an Amazon facility in Alabama. So let's talk about these trends. Which retail trends do you think will last? And they can include those that are not on the list. How likely are you going to be the same type of shopper after the pandemic is over with? I'm not suggesting that you'll stay home, but how often, are you going to, every other trip you'll do online instead of what you used to do going out? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the sociology of shopping.
Steve Kearns.
Steve.
So I have always shopped retail online since I've had the ability, but I can't wait to get back to the supermarket and avoid having people pick my produce for me and pick my meat for me.
Oh, yeah.
And as soon as I feel comfortable, and I'm approaching that point, I'm going to stop going to the curbside pickup for groceries. There's something about shopping and wandering through a grocery store that just pardon the pun, feeds me.
Well, particularly if you have the grocery stores that also have things you can snack on there, grab a cup of coffee, it's become.
I don't know that that's going to happen anytime soon, but yeah, I want to go back to grocery shopping. I like being able to pick the quality of what I'm picking.
The produce and the meats, I think, are absolutely that. Until they come up with kind of like a grading system, right? Not just the agricultural grading, but some type of quality, freshness, pictures or what have you. It's just, you can get bananas that are so ripe that they're well beyond our taste.
I want to be able to get avocados that aren't all ripe on Tuesday.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. Thank you very much.
Linda Overholt.
Linda.
The convenience of delivery right here on my porch is just unbeatable. And compared to before, I'm caring for my 103-year-old mother-in-law and running errands and getting things for her. And there would be times I'm looking for this specific thing and I could end up in 2 or 3 different places to find it. And now I just order it and it's delivered. And I have some things now for her on subscribe and save. They just appear once a month. And so that has been hard to beat. And I have gotten into the clothes shopping as well. And they make it really convenient because you know everything is not going to work out for you, but they make the returns so simple that, you know, I think I'm going to tend more to the online shopping, even when going back to in person. And I still go to the grocery store. I've got to pick my own avocados. And that's it.
Great for the avocado endorsement for picking avocado so far. Anyone else want to speak on this before we move on?
I have two individuals that
Okay.
are new. Okay, Bill Sampson.
Bill.
Okay, several items. One, changing retail landscape. If you've noticed that Sears is closing its last retail store in Orange County. And if you drive up on the 60 or the 5 and go into LA, that giant Sears store on Boyle that used to be the catalog center.
Oh yeah,
that's going. They're closing that as well. If you go into Best Buy, especially the store in Orange, apparently that's a test store, and they've gotten rid of most of their full-time employees, and they have a desk when you walk in, and they ask you if you know what you're in there for. If you do, they tell you go ahead and get it. If you don't, then you have to wait for somebody to help you. 75% of apparel last quarter was sold online. Gap and Macy's, two people who've been in malls forever, all of their new stores are going to be off mall. They've decided that they're going to come up with Macy's Light and Gap stores that are about half the size of what they used to have. And finally, what's CVS going to do if you get rid of paper receipts?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, they single-handedly contribute to the rainforest being depleted.
Yeah.
Good points. Thank you, Bill. Anyone else want to speak on this?
George Peasley.
Okay, George.
Yeah, I seldom had shopped online until recently. My protein drinks became unavailable retail-wise. I go into Amazon now. They have everything I need. As soon as I need it, it gets delivered the next day. And so I've basically stopped shopping for protein drinks retail completely.
Yeah, you get that way, and then you get used to it. That you know, it's a click away. My wife and I went down to see our grandson the other day. We were there about an hour, and when we came out, there were 7 Amazon packages on our daughter and her husband's porch. Seven in an hour. And I have a feeling that may not be the only deliveries they had that day. Okay, one more topic, and then we'll call it quits. Thank you, everyone, for participating. We have left here. We've got a lot we can go through, but we only do the amount of time we have today. Let's talk about taxes. I'm fascinated by how you do your tax return, because for the past 30 years, I've hired a CPA to do my taxes, and I pay several $100s a year for it. And everyone I talk to say, well, you should be using one of the software packages. And I think the New York Times yesterday or the other day ran, a flow chart on which tax software to use, or should you use a CPA or use the IRS free file by TurboTax. That is free. That is free. The best advice I think I got was, I believe, from Jim Monroe that well, why don't you just have your guy do it this year and then buy the software and do it yourself and see if your numbers come out right. And if and compare the cost. My only problem this year, my CPA took an hour and a half to do my taxes. He said, "Oh, this was very difficult this year because the way some of the tax laws have changed this year. For example, those of you who are on required minimum distribution, you had an opportunity to suspend it. But if you were like me and you had it being paid on a monthly basis, or at least some of my RRAs being paid on a monthly basis, there was a provision to pay it back. Well, that created hours of effort, and in order to see how to do that. The New York Times Wirecutter service, which is kind of their consumer service and analysis service, this is not an OLLI recommendation. They said the best software they know of is the free one, the IRS free file by TurboTax. And why it's free by TurboTax? TurboTax and some of the Intuit and some of the other companies went to Congress to prohibit the IRS from putting out their own product. So it's called the IRS now free file by TurboTax. Of course, if you have complicated finances, or they seem every year when you're about to do them complicated, or you want to have the a security blanket in forms of a CPA or an enrolled agent with you if you ever get audited, of course, there's nothing better than going to those folks. But consider your choices. And I would like to have us discuss taxes as probably our final topic today. Tell me how you're doing your taxes this year, and tell me any challenges you're facing that are not just, I mean, general challenges that you can point out to fellow members. This is not tax advice. This is issues that you might want to take back to or to research further with your tax experts. So let's talk about that. So how do you all prepare your taxes? Any suggestions? Should I continue to pay $445 a year with a high-powered CPA?
Mr. Jim Monroe.
Okay, I used to have a tax preparer. And he made mistake. I found he made a mistake that caused me some grief, just typing in numbers. So I went to TurboTax, works great, straightforward to do. The interesting thing this year is, well, last year I didn't have to take a required minimum distribution. That was great because I didn't have to pay, the taxes I didn't have to pay because it was like income. And then so this year I filled it out in 2020, and hey, I get the stimulus from last year because my income showed so low. And then I got it in early, and then come Friday night, I get another stimulus check. So life is good, what a glorious country, and all because I didn't have to take that minimum distribution. So what a glorious country. And
yeah, not taking the RMD this year or last tax year, and not paying for it this year, and the ability, if you itemize or if you don't itemize anymore, to take the $300 payment, which I understand is going to increase during this tax year to $600 or $300 per individual, and $600 on a joint was also very nice to take that as a top line deduction as well, as opposed to in addition to your standard deduction.
Okay, we do our own tax returns and have always done our own tax returns. Mike, did you specifically ask your CPA what made your tax returns so complicated? I mean, is this something that you couldn't do, or you couldn't, looking at what he did, reconstruct it by yourself?
Well, yeah, it was something that you would think was something that he would run into, and that was paying back a distributed RMD, how you pay it back, and I got to admit, I must have been among the first tier of callers to Vanguard and to Vantage Point Retirement Corps that they weren't sure how to do it, but we got a 1099-R as if the money distributed, and it did distribute, and I said, well, where is the? But I paid it. I paid that money. I returned that money. Here's the cashier's checks that you demanded I give you for that same amount. Oh yeah, you need to talk to your CPA or talk to your tax guy on it. And the tax guy said, no, it's been an interesting journey, but I think I got that right.
You hope.
But it took me an hour and a half it took you an hour and a half. So yeah, that's what mine was.
Okay, my husband was overhearing this, and when your CPA, when you said your CPA took an hour and a half, my husband frowned. So my husband has a PhD in engineering, so he's pretty good on math. Also, just for anyone else, there's been a last minute change in how unemployment insurance is handled. They don't even have the worksheet out yet. People who have already filed and have received unemployment are going to have to file an amended return because they're excluding the first $10,200 of received unemployment insurance. So sometimes it doesn't pay to pay early unless you know you're getting a substantial, to file early unless you know you're getting a substantial refund.
Okay, we're out of time, and this is our last money news of the semester. We'll be back, everyone willing, and on money news in the fall semester. We'll be back on a couple of classes I teach are still remaining in this semester. Next week will be the American Presidency class, and then after the spring recess, we'll come back with can they do that? The class on the Constitution. So thank you all for being very attentive and indulgent with me. As Jim Monroe pointed out, we did cover a lot today. There was even more. Here's the thing, there's always a lot to cover in money. And I appreciate your perspectives. I feel more informed thanks to all of your knowledge and your perspectives. Thank you much. Bye-bye.
Bye.